Well, hey folks, and welcome to Solar Cabin Channel. This is my segment where I answer questions from my viewers. Got a really good question today from Stephen in British Columbia, Canada. And he was asking why I didn't use logs when I built my homestead cabin. So I thought I'd explain a little bit about logs and some of the old homesteads that are constructed with logs and why I didn't use logs for my cabin. Now I'm out here in the boonies, the Cedarbilly area, which is only about 2 minutes from my house. It's actually in my backyard. And we're at the foot of the Uinta Mountains, which is way up there. But down here where the homesteaders built their homes, this is what it looked like when they moved into this area. Just full of sagebrush and cedars. That's why they call us Cedarbillies in this area here. And I'm going to explain a little bit about cedarwood, but I'll tell you, I'm out here walking with my dogs. Got the dogs out here with me. And they love to come out here and take a walk through the sand dunes and sagebrush, maybe scare up a rabbit. Now, I hunted this area when I was a kid. I've been all over this, walked it for miles and miles and miles, hunting rabbits and deer. We might even spook up because I just seen a head of deer, or heard a deer out in this area, so we might spook them up, and maybe I'll get some video of some deer. We usually chase out a few rabbits, cottontails and jackrabbits, and maybe even a snowshoe, though I haven't seen snowshoes in this area for a long time. They used to be around here. But the dogs like to chase those around, and so this is my stomping ground. Now, I'm going to show you, when I come hiking, I always bring my walking stick. Now, I hope you can see this. This is actually a cedar root, which I pulled loose from a tree that had died. And that's what I made my walking stick out of. And cedar root makes really nice walking sticks because it's very flexible. As you can see, it's got a lot of give and flex to it. But it won't break. It's also super strong. So it won't break under my weight, but it also flexes a little bit, so it's not a real stiff wood, and it can also be carved up nice. I haven't carved this one. I need to do some carving on the handle up here. But I just found that, and that makes a really nice walking stick, so that's what I use that for. So we're going to discuss a little bit about old homestead cabins. We're going to wander out through here, take a little hike down to an old homestead cabin that I know of in this area that's about as old as my granddad's cabin, probably around 100 years old. Even a little older, built probably around the early 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And this area was all homestead area. People moved down in here because the land was open. It was either cheap or free, and so they'd come down in here and get a bunch of land. But you can see that the land was also poor land. A lot of sand, a lot of sandstone, sagebrush, and cedar trees. But it does happen to sit next to some good water. And so if you can get water on land, you can till it up. And underneath the sand is pretty good dirt. And so they would till it up and they could turn this into farmland. So you can see over there on that ridge, that's all farmland. It's along that canal bank. And we'll go over and take a look at that canal bank too. So anyway, I'm going to wander on down here and I'll show you this homestead cabin. Okay, so I've hiked that back in here probably about 2 miles and come across this old cabin now. I know the history of this cabin. I know the family. This old cabin, I believe, belonged to the Powells. And they were homesteaders about the same time as my granddad homesteaded in this area. And some of you may have heard the Powell name. Lake Powell, which is down in southern Utah, which is a huge recreation area down there, is named after the same family that homesteaded in this area, the Powells. And I think this is one of their first original homesteads here. Now, they owned a lot of land. All that farmland back up in there is all Powell land. Now, they started out in little cabins like this. Then after they started becoming successful as farmers, then they would build bigger houses and expand their farms. And they've got a real nice big house back there that I'll show you on the other side of those trees. And they also came into some oil money. As you can see, some oil wells over there on the edge. And the oil money helped them to develop their farmland. And they still did a lot of farming, but the oil money certainly didn't hurt. Now, this area, like I said, is full of cedars, but it's also full of these large sandstone formations, sandstone ridges. This one's come up to the surface, but these are underneath the ground here. And the water, as you can see, the mountains still have a lot of snow on them. I'll zoom in here. The mountains still have a lot of snow on them. But underneath the ridges, underneath the sandstone, the water runs freely. And so we were able to drill artesian free-flowing wells, which I'll show you over here next to this old homestead. So you could get the water, because water runs downhill, gravity flow. would run down through these cracks through the sandstone, and so the homesteaders down in this area had pretty easy access to good running water in this area. Even though it looks like desert, like there's no water, there's actually really good water just a few, 8-10 feet underneath the ground. There's good water that they could hit for drilling wells. Because the snowpack would melt, and then that water runs down through the cracks and crevices through the sandstone. So here's this old cabin, and I'll get you up closer to it. Like I said, this was built probably around the late 1800s, first 1900s in here. It was one of the first homesteads up in here. And it was built from logs. Now the logs that they used for building these did not come from right here on this ground, because there's no pine trees that grow down this low. They like to be up in the colder climates. So they would go up and get their logs up there in the mountains, and then using horses and wagons, they would haul them down here for building their cabins. I just noticed that there's a bottle, old-fashioned wide-mouth bottle, something left there. Now this is private property, but I know the family, and I know they wouldn't mind if I was just up in here as long as I don't touch anything, mess with anything, or take anything off the property, and I respect that. Wouldn't want to do that because these are people I know, and even if I didn't know them, I still wouldn't mess with their property. But I'm sure they won't mind if we take a look at this old cabin. Now, logs were the common building material for old homesteads. And as you can see, there's a lot of spaces in between those logs. Some of the logs are bigger, some of the logs are smaller, and you can notice that they just put the logs right on sandstone. They used sandstone for their formations because they didn't have cement or anything like that back then that was available anyway. So they used sandstone, and they would just prop up the cabins on that, and then the cabins would sit on dirt. And generally these old cabins just had a dirt floor. They didn't have dimensional lumber like we have now for making flat wood. You can see that the splices that they put in these cabins, they had to hand adze those, A-D-Z-E, with an adze in order to square them, and that took a lot of work and still didn't come up with a very square board or a flat board that could be used for a floor. So generally they just had dirt floors, and I'll show you the inside of this. Now these are chinked. The chinking that they used here was made from red clay, and that's what they would pack into those, and then they'd have to re-chink them usually every year wherever the chinking started falling out. And then they would use these splices. They would cut these splices for really wide spots in the walls. Then they would cut wood splices, and you can see the wood splices have all fallen down here on the ground. Those would have been fit into any wide opening. Then they would splice, and then over the splices you can see in between, then they would use the red clay chinking to seal these. Now, one of the reasons that I did not use logs for my cabin is, one thing, they're very labor intensive. You can see that they take a lot of labor to construct a log cabin. The other reason is logs are not a great insulator. A log was only about about 0.4 R, 0.5 R per inch. So in a log wall like this, which only has about 10-inch logs, you're only going to get maybe R5. In the areas in between the chinking, you'd have even less than that. So, and there'd be a lot of leaking around logs. So they're just not well insulated and tough to insulate. Basically, newer log homes, they put logs up maybe on the outsides, but then they build a frame wall on the inside and they insulate that, unless they're using really, really big logs. And in this area, we don't get great big pine logs like they do in some areas. So you would have to build a frame on the inside, which would take dimensional lumber, and then insulate that in order to have really a warm cabin. So that's the reason that I didn't use logs. Plus, logs in this area are very expensive. When you figure out the cost for logs, it was going to cost less to build with dimensional lumber. So that's the reason I did not build with logs. But I love the look of the old log cabins. As you can see, they've used logs across the ceiling as braces, with one large log up there at the ridge board, and they just let them stick out here over the edges. Okay. And then this cabin is probably about, I'm guessing about a 16 by 16. We'll take you inside here. Inside this cabin, you can see they have a really large door on the back side. One window on the, that would be the west side, and a window on the east, and door, a door on the east side, and no window on the south side. And that's probably to keep the sun from coming in this place and overheating it, which is kind of surprising. Maybe the sun, I might be misguided here. That might actually be more of the southeast side, so maybe they were catching the sun from that direction probably. and this might have been a colder wall. Generally, you don't put windows on the sides where the walls are cold. And you notice they don't put any windows on this back side, just a door here. They kept just the 2 windows and the 1 door. This is about a 16 by 16. You can see the old plank, if you can see it here. You can see the old plank lumber, rough cut lumber that they used for the roofing. Now I'm guessing that was probably added after. You can see that they used mud, and they probably would have put sod up on top of here for roofing, because they didn't have asphalt roofing back when they made these. So what they would do is they would actually put dirt up on the roof. Sometimes the roofs would grow and sprout grass and they'd be a living roof, but they would have to get up there and put thatching and dirt back up on their roofs all the time. And you can see the dirt, some of the dirt starting to fall through there. And then you can see the chinking in between the walls, and you can see all the chinking pretty much is falling out of this cabin, but the cabin is still standing and the logs are still, I don't see any termite damage or anything to these logs. They're actually, you know, for over 100 years old, this thing has really good structural logs. And the same thing was found with my granddad's old cabin, is that they had great logs in them that are still very usable. My brother he built a frame inside the old cabin to insulate it, to make it functional and warm enough for him and his family. But he kept the old sides of the log cabin to make it look nice. And you can see this is kind of tilted and shifted in the years that have went by. But this would have housed an entire family. They would have just had, excuse me, beds along a wall usually. There's no loft or anything in this place. Got a little allergy. And they would have just all probably heated this with a wood stove and collected cedar wood for heating it. Now, outside of this cabin, at one point, this cabin probably belonged to more than one family. What usually happened is the old homesteaders, the first homesteader would build a cabin like this. Then they would advance to a bigger house, a nicer house usually, and then the kids would end up living here. And so there might have been 2 or 3 generations at one time lived in this old place as they developed their own properties. Now, at one point, they did drill a well up in here. They wouldn't have had this when they first had the property. This probably came in later. But they've drilled a well, and here it is many, many years later, and this well is still producing water. And you can see it's got a nice little stream running down there. It doesn't produce a lot of water, but it's still producing water. Don't know how. I'm guessing that well probably only 20 feet deep at the most, but still producing water in this area. And so that you can see they had water. And here's another old bottle sitting here. There's an old wide-mouth Mason Star bottle, old-fashioned bottle in here, and there's other stuff that's just been kind of scattered around in this area as people have come down and visited this. This is interesting. These are a couple of old shoes. I don't know how old they are. I'm guessing probably from the 50s or 40s or 50s, maybe even older than that, from the looks of the laces and the eyes on them. And there's a couple old boots that had been thrown out here. Anyway, that's the old homesteader cabins and how they build them, and that's my reason that I didn't build. I went with dimensional lumber because I wanted more R-value insulation, and it was less labor intensive, easier to build, and I could get the materials locally, where these old homesteaders, they had to rely on their skills in order to get their materials. Now we can get dimensional lumber from a lumber store instead of having to go out and cut it down with an axe. But I have a lot of respect for people that hand build their own cabins. That took a lot of work and a lot of ingenuity in order to build these old cabins like this. And if you do them right, you can make a log cabin into a very nice insulated homestead for yourselves. But it does take a lot more work. I would say it takes a lot more skill. And you want to really investigate and research how to do that before you just jump into building a log cabin if you want it to last. These cabins, as you can see, over 100 years old, were built to last. But they were still never permanent housing. The people would build these and live in them to get them through until they got their farm functioning, was successful, and then they would usually build a better house somewhere else on a different piece of property or something like that. Use these for bunkhouses for their kids. And that's what we did. I lived in a bunkhouse next to my dad's cabin when I was a kid. All my brothers did. So anyway, we're going to wander up around here now, maybe scare out a rabbit and see if we can find some deer. And hope you enjoyed seeing this cabin. So come on along, let's go see if we can find some animals for these dogs to chase. I was just going to show you this. This was the old homestead. There's the homestead there. This is the old homestead cellar. And all these places around here had a cellar. My granddad had a cellar next to his place too. Now this one's collapsed. The roof is collapsed on it. But these would have been covered over. They usually go about 5-6 feet down into the ground because it's cooler down there, so they would store their root vegetables and things like that for wintertime. They'd store them in a cellar like this, and then you can see they've used the natural sandstone to create their walls. And this is a pretty good sized cellar down in there. I don't recommend you mess around with old cellars, especially in this area. You never know what you're going to run into. Rattlesnakes and scorpions and skunks like to hang out in old cellars. So we're going to leave it alone. But it's kind of, get out of there. It's kind of neat to see they had an old cellar here. So we're going to wander on around here now. Come on, dogs. Okay, I was just going to show you this. This is part of the old corral of this homestead. And this is made out of cedar logs. Just cut from the local cedar trees around here. And you can see the beautiful coloring on these trees. At least I hope you can see it. See the beautiful mottled coloring on the cedar? Now these cedar logs are probably, you know, at least 60, 70 years old or older, and they're still standing. Cedar is still used for fence posts because it's very resilient wood. It doesn't decay fast, even after it's cut and put in the ground. It's termites don't like it. Termites won't eat cedar wood. It's also soft enough that you can see it can be cut. And see how they've notched it here? They notched that to hold a fence post. Barbed wire was very, very rare in this area. This barbed wire was probably put up later. They would use logs. As you can see, the old logs are just laying around here. They use the pine logs for the rails, but they use the cedars that went into the ground, because if you put a pine log in the ground, it'll rot and deteriorate in just a few years and it'll fall apart. But they would put the cedar, and you can see that the pine logs all look in pretty bad shape. They've all fallen on the ground and have deteriorated right back into the soil, but the cedars are still standing. But the cedars in this area are not big enough for anything except fence posts, pretty much. But we get a lot of cedars, fence posts, and my dad had all cedar fence posts on the old homestead that lasted 100 years. But eventually they do rot and fall to the ground too, but that was used by most of the old homesteaders around here for building fences. All right, I've got another ways to go to get back to the truck, so we're going to go on hiking and see if we can run into some animals. Okay, so I'm just on a long hike here, and I just seen the tail end of a herd of deer. So we're going to see if I can get up close enough and keep the dogs from spooking them. And we'll see if we can find that herd of deer up in here and see what... It's probably just a bunch of yearlings and does, but we'll see what's in them. So this is my old hunting ground. Boy, I pulled a lot of rabbits and deer out of here. Got a lot of nice bucks in this area. But the bucks will be up higher this time of year. They won't be down this low. They'll come down in rutting season. In the fall, they'll start coming down. And then we might see them down in this area, but the rest of the year you probably won't see too many bucks down in this area. Then all the deer will move up higher as it gets warmer in here. So I'm going to look for this herd of deer. Now if you look right there, that's a herd of deer that are up in these cedars. And I used to chase these deer all over the place and pulled some big bucks out of here. But was just coming up here and seen these deer just sitting here. And that's good to know. That's probably a bunch of yearlings, I would guess. There might be a doe or so in there. I don't see any horns, of course, but it's the wrong time of year. Bucks will usually be up higher. But in rutting season, then they'll come down here and find these herds of does to breed with. And so during hunting season, we'll find the big bucks. But these yearlings and these does, they hang out here in these cedars all the time. So that's nice to know that they're in this area still. So here you can get a better view of the valley right above that old homestead. And this land is all Powell homestead land. This all belongs to the Powells down in that area. And you can see that they've cleared all the land, and they've got cattle and farmland, growing alfalfa and things like that. Then you can see the area now is dotted with oil wells. There's an oil well over there, another oil well over there, and about half a dozen more up that direction. This was a natural, probably a river at one time. Now there's a canal that runs down below it, and I'm going to take you up that canal one of these days, maybe in my next video. because it's full of wildlife. We get black swans and cranes and things like that come down in that area. But you can see there's the mountains up there. And this was probably a river, just the way it's shaped. This basin, that's why it's called the basin. At one time, this was probably a river that ran down through here and cut this through this area. And down in the bottom land, down in there, is what they call alluvial soil, which is really good for growing things. So the old homesteaders would know that. They know that the better soil was down hole. And look, if you look way over there, see if we can zoom in, way over there, there goes the herd of deer that I've been following. I've been following that herd of deer forever, and I got some pretty good video of them. But we spooked them out, and now they're heading off across. They look like kangaroos from here, but they're heading off across that field, getting over into some different territory. They don't like me being around, didn't like the smell of my dogs. Anyway, as you can see, there was good hunting for the homesteaders up in this area. And up higher, there was all kinds of fishing. And there was pheasants, and there was rabbits, and there was all kinds of animals in here they could survive on that they could hunt. And then they grew gardens and stuff like that, and stored the food in the cellars for their winter. So this was good homesteading land, even though it's full of cedars. You can see that once it's cleared, it becomes good farmland. All right, well, I appreciate you coming along on this hike with me. I hope you enjoyed the hike and seeing some of the scenery, seeing that old homestead cabin. Oh, I was going to tell you, those houses over there now, those belong to the Powells. So you can see they did pretty well for themselves for starting out into a little cabin. Their family did real well for themselves now. They have really big houses up on nice views of the hill, and they turned all this bottom land into farmland, and they also collect royalties from the oil wells, so they're doing okay for a bunch of old homesteaders that lived in a little 16 by 16 log cabin, I would say. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do subscribe to my channel. Come by my website, simplesolarhomesteading.com. Hey, take a look at my website. I've got some new cabin plans on there. I have the A-frame cabin plans all done. You can download the complete cabin plans ebook and the framing modules. So you can build an A-frame if you want, and I'm also working on a new cabin called a Quixote Cottage cabin, which is a super insulated 6-inch wall cabin that would be really good for colder climates or hot climates if you want. So come by and take a look at those. Again, simplesolarhomesteading.com. All right, folks, thanks again and have a great day.